Far from Rome now, Alan joins us from his new home in Beloit, Kansas. Alan, it's so great to have you back on EWTN to share your personal insights about Pope Benedict and the work that you did alongside him. First, tell us about Pope Benedict's character. From the beginning, there were many caricatures of his personality because he was the first German pontiff in a long time. What did you experience in covering his work as leader of the Church?
Good to be here with you, Montse. It was those caricatures led to so many misunderstandings. He had this title of God's Rottweiler, and then also the German Panzer Cardinal that he had to get over. Those were public images created largely in the media, I suppose, to sell newspapers, because the people who were closest to him inevitably speak about how meek he was, how he valued his colleagues' input, how he esteemed them, and also how he listened. He was someone whoever he had in front of him, it was as if they were the only person on earth. And he would treat every topic that would come up in the office with respect, and then he would come to a decision, seeking the truth at all times. And he led other people to that excellence and to a sense of leadership and responsibility for those same things. People who came across him outside of the office on the streets, he had a known routine where he would cross St. Peter's Square to go back to his home for lunch. And people would wait for him there to speak with him, and he would speak to them. That idea that he was God's Rottweiler was ridiculous in the end. He was such a towering intellectual figure, and yet he was so humble. And that is what my experience with him was as well, is that you had in front of you a person that you knew was seeking your good and the good of every man and woman around him, if only that they would listen.
So humble and so approachable. After the late Pope John Paul II, the global Catholic Church was used to a pretty charismatic leader. And Benedict, he honored that legacy, responding to the shouts of Santo Subito for Pope John Paul the Great, and he waived the usual 5-year waiting period for the sainthood process. Why was the collaboration between those two popes so significant?
Imagine following in those footsteps of John Paul II. He was able to do that, to follow in his footsteps, and also to support him because they were such close friends. They complemented each other. You had John Paul II, who was known for being a people's person, for going out into the world and speaking of the Lord. And you have his right-hand man back at the Vatican, holding down the fort, holding down the faith, protecting the deposit of the faith in a way that led to the ministry of John Paul II being more efficacious. He knew that he could count on Cardinal Ratzinger. And if you can imagine teams in the world today, you have great leaders, but you always have a great supporting staff. And Benedict the XVI was one of the captains of John Paul II's team.
And Benedict, he did take a different approach to travel as well, being older, but just a different approach as well. He wasn't hiding in the Vatican walls either. What was most significant about his international outreach to you and what you've covered?
Well, it's incredible if you look at how popes travel. John Paul II, Pope Francis, Benedict the XVI, all elderly men, obviously at the end of their lives, John Paul II and Benedict the XVI, but they went out. Benedict did not shy away from going out into the field, so to speak, speaking to people across the world. And whereas you have Francis, who goes to the existential and geographical peripheries of the world, you had Benedict the XVI, who took on secularism and secularized countries head on. He went to places like France, he went to the Czech Republic, to the United Kingdom, to his native Germany. And he went there with the message of Christ in places where you don't necessarily speak about that in public. And here is the most public of figures in the most public of events, not shying away from what was known to be hostile environments, at least how the media depicted the societies that he was going to. I remember the United Kingdom in particular. Here's Pope Benedict going to a country where they're talking about protests, people are going to show up on the streets, nobody's going to welcome him. And from the first day onwards, when they saw who he was, these wall-to-wall broadcasts just showed him with his message, and both he and his message were welcomed, even if people didn't agree with him.
That's important. Well, with all of that, his resignation was a shock to the world. Was it a shock to you?
Yeah. I was at a meeting actually when I got the call from one of our correspondents, and it was an important meeting. I couldn't exit out of the meeting, so I kept pressing cancel, like stop the call. Like I couldn't take the call at that moment, and so I walked out afterwards, took a subway, came up out of the subway, and it had happened already, probably an hour prior. Made the phone call to that correspondent, and she told me what happened. I stopped in my tracks. It was raining that day, and what was going through my mind was we had prepared for the possibility of the death of a pope. Somewhat, you're never quite prepared for that. That's always kind of in the back of your mind as a sort of a nightmare situation. But we had never prepared for resignation. And so we kind of asked ourselves, what do we do now? And listening to the dean of the College of the Cardinals, who received that message from the Pope himself, he said, this comes as a lightning bolt in a clear sky. And that's what happened with us. If you look back and you look at the clues, you could see that the Pope was preparing us and himself and his collaborators for that. But it came as a complete surprise.
Well, Alan, you continued to cover the Vatican after Benedict's resignation, and you visited with him. What were these encounters like?
Well, the last time that I went to meet with him, I went with my whole family, and that was about a year and a half ago, right before we left Rome. It was June of 2021, and it was an incredible moment for me to introduce my family to him, and also for them to meet him and get to know a person that I'd always esteemed, and they had always spoken about with me, because I would bring my work home. I got to thank him for his Italian. He's basically taught me Italian. I learned as I listened to him.
Wow.
And my wife is also Italian. And so that was kind of a funny moment. He didn't expect that. But then I also thanked him for his example of faith on behalf of so many people, giving him that opportunity also to receive those words, because I don't know how many people he would have been meeting with, families in particular at that point in his life. It was also not the first meeting that I'd had with him in his retirement. We had the opportunity as a group from the EWTN Vatican Bureau to visit him in the Vatican Gardens a couple of years prior to that. I think it was 2017. And that was another moment where we were all able to just speak with him sort of openly. He exchanged some gifts with us, spent about 20 minutes with us. And then before that, I had an opportunity just to meet privately with him with a very small group. On every occasion, he was very gracious. On the last of those occasions with my family, he was particularly tickled that we had a child named Joseph just as himself.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Alan, both for your witness and for your coverage and participating today with us.
Thank you, Montse.